I stood at the edge of the grand terrace overlooking Beverly Hills, my midnight blue silk dress catching the California sunset as it painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The 40th anniversary celebration of Sterling Fashion House was unfolding below me in the mansion's opulent ballroom, where my mother-in-law, Victoria Sterling, was about to deliver the speech that would change everything. The chandeliers cast diamonds of light across marble floors where fashion industry titans mingled with celebrities and international buyers. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, the night Victoria would finally announce my promotion to creative director. Instead, I was about to discover just how deep family betrayal could cut. My name is Catalina Reeves-Sterling, and I'd spent 5 years believing I was building a place for myself in this fashion dynasty. Fresh out of Parsons School of Design, I'd married Jonathan Sterling, the heir apparent to his mother's empire, thinking I was joining a family that valued talent and innovation. How wrong I was. Victoria's voice carried across the ballroom with the authority of someone who'd built a billion-dollar brand from a small boutique in Rodeo Drive. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight marks not just 4 decades of Sterling Fashion House, but the beginning of a new chapter. I held my breath, waiting for her to call my name, to announce the creative leadership role she'd promised me just last week. It is my pleasure to introduce our new creative director, someone who truly understands the Sterling vision, my son Jonathan's wife, Gabrielle Chen-Sterling. The applause that followed felt like thunder in my ears, but not because it was for me. Gabrielle stepped forward in a stunning white designer gown, her perfect smile gleaming under the lights as she accepted congratulations from the crowd. Gabrielle Chen-Sterling, Jonathan's first wife. The woman who'd supposedly died in a car accident 3 years ago. If you're fascinated by stories of deception that run so deep they rewrite entire family histories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you mind-bending narratives like this every week. Stories that will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these incredible tales that remind us how easily reality can be manipulated by those we trust most. Now let's see how Catalina uncovers a conspiracy that goes far beyond a simple affair. I gripped the marble railing so hard my knuckles turned white. The woman I was staring at was supposed to be dead. I'd attended her memorial service. I'd comforted Jonathan through months of grief. I'd married him believing I was helping him heal from tragic loss. But there she was, very much alive, accepting accolades for designs I now realized weren't Jonathan's late wife's work, they were mine. Pieces I'd created over the past 3 years, sketches I'd left on our kitchen table, concepts I'd shared with Jonathan during late-night conversations about my dreams for the company. My legs felt weak as the pieces fell into place. The mysterious trips Jonathan took every few months. The way Victoria's promises about my future with the company always seemed to shift just out of reach. The subtle ways they'd both made me feel like an outsider trying to prove my worth to a family that would never truly accept me. I forced myself to smile and applaud as Gabrielle delivered a speech about innovation and vision, words that sounded suspiciously similar to the presentation I'd given Victoria just 2 weeks ago. The Sterling woman has always been someone who sees fashion not just as clothing, but as art that tells stories, Gabrielle said, her voice carrying perfectly across the silent room. Our upcoming collection will revolutionize sustainable luxury fashion. Sustainable luxury fashion. The exact phrase I'd coined in my thesis at Parsons. The concept I'd been developing in secret for months, planning to present as my first major initiative as creative director. I slipped away from the terrace and made my way through the mansion's labyrinthine hallways, my mind racing. If Gabrielle was alive, that meant everything about my marriage was built on lies. But how deep did this deception go? I found myself in Victoria's private study, a room I'd only been in twice before during formal family meetings. The walls were lined with photos documenting 4 decades of Sterling Fashion House history, but tonight I was looking at them with new eyes. There, in a silver frame on Victoria's desk, was a photo I'd never noticed before. Victoria, Jonathan, and Gabrielle at what looked like a recent dinner. Gabrielle's hair was shorter than it had been tonight, and she was wearing a dress I recognized, one I designed and sewn myself last summer, thinking I was creating a gift for Jonathan's sister. My hands shook as I opened Victoria's laptop. The password was exactly what I expected from someone so self-absorbed. Sterling 1982, the year she'd founded her company. The email account that opened revealed months of correspondence between Victoria, Jonathan, and someone listed in the contacts as GC Creative. Gabrielle Chen, using her maiden name. I scrolled through messages that made my stomach turn. Plans to keep me occupied with busy work, while Gabrielle developed my designs into a full collection. Discussions about how to handle the Catalina situation once the new collection launched. Strategies for making me feel valued enough to stay, but never valued enough to demand real recognition. The most recent email was dated just this morning. Everything is in place for tonight's announcement. G has been perfecting the collection based on C's sketches. Post-announcement, we proceed with the divorce filing. C won't have grounds to claim any creative ownership since all official documentation lists G as designer. The Brazilian expansion moves forward with G as lead, and C can transition to a consulting role with appropriate severance. J. Victoria's response was even more chilling. Perfect. 20 years of planning finally paying off. G's death bought us exactly the time we needed to position everything properly. C never suspected a thing. 20 years of planning. This conspiracy went back to long before I'd even met Jonathan. I photographed everything with my phone, then dug deeper into the computer files. What I found was a complete alternate history of Sterling Fashion House. Gabrielle hadn't died 3 years ago. She'd gone into hiding in Europe, supposedly for her health, while Victoria and Jonathan orchestrated an elaborate fake death. The car accident had been staged using a body double they'd never identified publicly, claiming the remains were too damaged for viewing. During those 3 years, Gabrielle had been living in Milan and Paris, working with European manufacturers to set up the supply chain for Sterling's international expansion. Meanwhile, I'd been the unwitting spy in my own home, sharing my creative ideas with Jonathan, who passed them along to Gabrielle to develop into commercial designs. The Brazilian expansion mentioned in the email was worth an estimated $200 million. A project I'd researched and proposed, but which would now launch under Gabrielle's name, cementing her position as the creative visionary behind Sterling's next phase of growth. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the laptop, slipping my phone into my clutch, just as Jonathan appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying that warm tone that used to make my heart race. Now it made my skin crawl. "People are asking where you went." "Just needed a moment to process everything," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's quite a surprise about Gabrielle." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something, relief, in his eyes. "I know it's shocking. We weren't sure how to tell you that we'd been in contact. After she recovered from her injuries, she reached out, wanting to contribute to the family business again." "Recovered from her injuries?" I kept my voice steady, curious. "The accident wasn't as fatal as we initially believed. She was in a coma for months, then years of rehabilitation in private facilities. We didn't want to give you false hope about her condition." Lie after lie, delivered with the same sincere expression he'd worn when he proposed to me on the beach in Malibu. When he'd told me he was ready to love again after losing the woman of his dreams. "I'm happy for you," I said softly. "For both of you. She seems incredible." "She is," Jonathan replied, and for the first time since I'd known him, his smile seemed genuine. "Always has been." That night, I lay awake in our king-sized bed, listening to Jonathan's steady breathing beside me. The man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, he was someone who'd systematically manipulated every aspect of my life to serve a purpose I'd never understood. But I wasn't the naive design student who'd fallen for his charm anymore. 5 years in the Sterling family had taught me things Parsons never could. How to read people. How to play politics. How to hide my true thoughts behind a perfect smile. If they wanted to play games, I'd show them what I'd learned. The next morning, I began my counterattack. My first call was to Marcus Chen, Gabrielle's older brother. I'd met him at a few family events before Gabrielle's supposed death, and I remembered him as someone who'd never seemed particularly fond of the Sterling family. "Marcus, this is Catalina Sterling. I hope you remember me." "Of course. How are you holding up after last night's surprise?" So he knew. "Actually, I was hoping we could meet for coffee. I have some questions about Gabrielle's recovery, and I thought you might be able to help me understand the timeline." There was a pause. "Catalina, are you sure you want to go down this road? I'm sure I deserve to know the truth about my own life." We met at a small cafe in Santa Monica, far from any place we might encounter Sterling family associates. Marcus arrived looking like a man carrying a heavy burden. "How long have you known she was alive?" I asked without preamble. Marcus sighed. "From the beginning. I helped stage the accident." The confession hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "Why?" "Gabrielle was pregnant," Marcus said quietly, "with Jonathan's child. But Victoria had other plans for the family business, plans that didn't include an heir that might challenge her ultimate control." My blood ran cold. "What happened to the baby?" "Gabrielle miscarried 2 weeks after the staged accident. The stress, the isolation, it was too much. By then, she was too deep into the deception to come back. Victoria convinced her that disappearing was the only way to protect herself from a custody battle that would destroy her career. And then I came along." "Then you came along," Marcus confirmed. "Young, talented, completely unaware of the family dynamics you were walking into." Victoria saw an opportunity, someone whose creativity she could exploit while keeping the real power in Gabrielle's hands. I leaned back in my chair, processing the full scope of the manipulation. "Marcus, I need your help." "What kind of help?" "The kind that ensures this family finally faces consequences for what they've done." Over the next week, Marcus and I worked together to document the entire conspiracy. He provided access to financial records showing payments to the medical facilities where Gabrielle had supposedly been recovering, which turned out to be luxury apartments in Milan and Paris. Bank transfers that funded her lifestyle while she developed my stolen designs. Insurance payouts from her fake death that had been quietly returned to Sterling Fashion House through shell companies. But our most valuable evidence came from Gabrielle herself. Marcus arranged for us to meet at his apartment, where Gabrielle agreed to tell me the truth in exchange for assurance that I wouldn't pursue criminal charges against her personally. The woman who sat across from me looked different from the polished creative director who'd accepted applause 3 nights ago. Smaller, somehow. More fragile. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said quietly. "When Victoria first suggested the fake death, it was supposed to be temporary. Just until I could get my life together after the miscarriage. But it wasn't temporary. Victoria made it clear that coming back too soon would raise questions about the insurance money, about the investigation into the accident. She said we needed to wait until the statute of limitations passed on fraud charges. And in the meantime, you watched them steal my work." Gabrielle's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to tell Victoria that what you were creating was too good, too personal to just take. But she said you were happy with your role, that you didn't have the business experience to handle creative leadership anyway. Did you believe that?" I wanted to. It was easier than admitting I was complicit in destroying someone's career. The conversation was being recorded with Gabrielle's permission. By the time she finished telling me about the Brazilian expansion, the fake medical records, and the divorce papers Jonathan planned to file within the month, I had everything I needed. 2 weeks later, I attended Sterling Fashion House's quarterly board meeting. As Jonathan's wife, I had the right to observe, though not to vote. I'd never exercised this right before, always claiming I was too busy with design work to attend business meetings. Today was different. The boardroom was full of fashion industry powerhouses, investors, and family members. Victoria sat at the head of the table in a power suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Jonathan was to her right, looking confident and relaxed. Gabrielle sat slightly behind them in the section designated for senior staff. "Before we begin," I said, standing up from the observer section, "I have some information to share that's relevant to the creative direction discussion on today's agenda." Victoria's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Catalina, this isn't really the appropriate venue for. I think the board should know that your new creative director has been dead for 3 years," I continued calmly. "At least, according to the death certificate filed with Los Angeles County, the insurance claims submitted to Sterling's policy providers, and the memorial service attended by most of the people in this room." The room went dead silent. Victoria's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. "Catalina, you're clearly upset about." "I'm upset about fraud," I said, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "Insurance fraud, identity fraud, and intellectual property theft spanning the last 3 years." I handed copies of the evidence to each board member while continuing my presentation. "What you're looking at are bank records showing payments to Ms. Chen during the period she was supposedly deceased, medical records proving no one matching her description was ever treated at the facilities where she claimed to be recovering, and recorded testimony from Ms. Chen herself admitting to the conspiracy." Board member Patricia Walsh, the fashion house's largest outside investor, was flipping through the documents with growing alarm. "Victoria, is this true? These are fabrications by a disgruntled family member who—" "These are facts that can be independently verified," I interrupted. "I've already provided copies to the FBI's white-collar crime division and the district attorney's office. They're particularly interested in the insurance fraud aspect, since that involves federal crimes." Jonathan finally found his voice. "Catalina, you're destroying our family." I looked at him with the calm of someone who no longer had anything to lose. "Jonathan, you destroyed our family the day you decided I was nothing more than a convenient source of unpaid creative labor." The emergency board vote took place that afternoon. Victoria Sterling was removed as CEO, pending investigation. Jonathan was stripped of his position as Chief Operating Officer. Gabrielle's employment was terminated immediately. But the real victory came 2 days later, when the FBI arrested all 3 of them on federal fraud charges. 6 months later, I sat in the restored offices of what was now called Reeves Creative House. The Sterling name had been too tainted by scandal to salvage, so the board had voted to rebrand entirely, with me as the new creative director and part owner. The Brazilian expansion was moving forward under my leadership, using the designs and strategy I'd originally developed. The sustainable luxury line that Victoria had tried to steal was launching next spring, with my name prominently featured as the creative vision behind it. Marcus Chin had joined our team as Chief Financial Officer, helping to rebuild the company's reputation and establish ethical business practices. Together, we were creating the kind of fashion house I'd always dreamed of working for, one where creativity was valued, where artists were credited for their work, and where family loyalty didn't excuse criminal behavior. The divorce from Jonathan was finalized last month. He pled guilty to fraud charges and received 3 years in federal prison, though he'd likely serve less with good behavior. Victoria got 5 years, and Gabrielle received probation in exchange for her cooperation with the investigation. I kept one memento from my time as a Sterling, the silver frame that had held the photo revealing Gabrielle's survival. Now it holds a picture of me accepting the Fashion Industry Innovation Award for the sustainable luxury collection that almost became someone else's legacy. Some people asked if I felt sorry for destroying a family that had taken me in and given me opportunities. But I realized they'd never actually given me anything. They'd just convinced me to give them everything I had. The woman who'd walked into that Beverly Hills mansion believing she was part of a family was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that real power doesn't come from the name on your business card or the family you marry into. It comes from refusing to let other people write your story. A year later, Reeves' Creative House had become one of the most respected names in sustainable fashion. We'd hired 12 new designers, established partnerships with ethical manufacturers worldwide, and created a foundation supporting emerging artists from underrepresented backgrounds. I was reviewing sketches for our next collection when my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister-in-law." My heart stopped. I hadn't spoken to any member of the Sterling family since the trial. But the woman who walked into my office wasn't someone I recognized. "I'm Emma Sterling," she said, extending her hand. "Jonathan's younger sister. We've never met because I've been studying in London for the past 6 years." Emma looked like a younger version of Jonathan, but her eyes held something he's never had, genuine warmth and intelligence. "I came to apologize," she continued, "and to ask if you consider giving me a chance to prove that not everyone in my family is incapable of basic decency." "What kind of chance?" "I graduate from Central St. Martin's next month with a degree in sustainable fashion design. I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like to apply for an entry-level position at your company." I studied her face, looking for traces of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize in her family members. Instead, I saw someone who seemed genuinely ashamed of her family's actions and determined to chart a different course. "Emma, your family tried to steal 3 years of my life and work. Why would I trust another Sterling?" "Because I'm not asking you to trust me," she replied. "I'm asking you to let me earn that trust. No special treatment, no family connections. Just a chance to prove that I'm more interested in creating something meaningful than in taking what belongs to someone else." 6 months later, Emma had become one of our most promising junior designers. She worked harder than anyone else, never asked for favors, and brought a fresh perspective to our sustainability initiatives. More importantly, she'd helped me understand that redemption doesn't have to be inherited, it can be chosen. The Sterling family name was still synonymous with scandal in fashion circles. But Emma was building something new under her own merit, just as I had learned to do. On the 2nd anniversary of the night that changed everything, I stood on the balcony of my new Malibu home, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in brilliant colors. The view was similar to the one from Victoria's mansion, but everything else was different. This house was mine, bought with money I'd earned through my own work. The designs scattered across my kitchen table were my creations, inspired by my vision, credited to my name. The life I was building belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the Forbes article about the company. Grandpa would be proud. The Forbes piece had featured Reeves' Creative House as one of the year's most innovative fashion companies, highlighting our commitment to ethical practices and designer recognition. They'd called me a disruptor who's redefining luxury fashion for a new generation. I thought about that night in Beverly Hills, when I'd stood frozen on a terrace, watching my dreams being handed to someone else. That woman had believed she needed other people's permission to be successful, other people's approval to be worthy. This woman knew better. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies can give you is forcing you to discover how strong you really are. Victoria, Jonathan, and Gabrielle had tried to make me disappear into their story. Instead, they taught me to write my own. The fashion industry is full of stories about families who build empires together, passing legacies from one generation to the next. But my story was different. It was about what happens when you refuse to let your legacy be stolen, even by the people who are supposed to love you most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I raised a glass of wine to toast the woman I'd become. Not despite the betrayal I'd endured, but because of how I'd chosen to transform it into something beautiful. Some stories end with families reunited and forgiveness all around. Mine ended with something better, the knowledge that I was strong enough to build something meaningful from the ashes of other people's lives. And that was a legacy no one could ever take away from me. Catalina's journey from naive newlywed to fashion industry powerhouse reminds us that sometimes the people who try to erase us end up teaching us exactly who we're meant to become. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about the courage to protect your creativity and claim credit for your own vision, even when that means standing alone against people who share your name and your bed. The Sterling family thought they could use her talent while keeping her powerless, but they underestimated the strength that comes from finally seeing the truth. What would you have done in Catalina's position? How far would you go to protect your creative work from family members who see it as their property? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more incredible stories about betrayal, resilience, and the amazing transformations that happen when people refuse to be victims of other people's greed.